Thank you very much for coming to this talk, and I'm going to be talking about a project that I conducted with two colleagues. So it's an international project looking at a particular method to use in teacher training contexts. So my colleagues here, you can see some screenshots. The whole project happened under strict lockdown. So it was all online. I've never actually met Alice Gruber, but this project was conducted with Alice Gruber from Heilbronn in Germany and Yuan Qian from Suzhou in China. And what we're going to be doing then in this talk is exploring this project, which was thinking about trying to test or assess how useful a particular technique was to change teachers' beliefs. And these are beliefs about the nature of English, so monolithic beliefs about English. So I'll talk about the challenge first. I'll then talk about the particular resource that we used, which was based on the idea of role models, and particularly near-peer role models, who would be modeling non-monolithic beliefs. And then I'll talk about the study that assessed how useful this technique was. So the challenge first. And as I said, this is about the strong mainstream monolithic beliefs that people have about English. So this word monolithic suggests single block of stone, or as we like to think of it, as a planet, a single big block of rock with very, very clear boundaries, something that is uniform, fixed in its shape, and essentially stable. And that basically equates in many people's minds to this idea of standard English, native speaker normed standard English with its correct and incorrect forms. The challenge is, though, that native standard English as a model and as a target of second language learning is not always going to be useful or appropriate for learners, especially when they are going to use the resources of English for sharing meaning in the real world. And this has been pointed out especially by scholars in the English as a lingua franca framework. It's also a bad thing. It's also something we want to challenge because of the social injustices involved as well. Non-native speaker stigmatization, sometimes racialized, this idea that if you sound like a non-native speaker, then you'll be valued less and stigmatized as a result. And the challenge is also a particularly strong one because these beliefs, these monolithic beliefs, are reinforced by very, very entrenched ideologies based on centuries of myths about English, and English being the language and the only correct and right language of the English people. So it's connected very much with senses of national identity too. So challenging that sort of monolithic orientation, we've got what Alistair Pennycook first called plurilithic thinking, and I've kind of appropriated Pennycook's term. So plurilithic Englishes, now in the plural, conceptualizes English not as this single object, but as multiple coalescing objects. So it's a bit more like a galaxy, as I've tried to suggest in the graphic there, with fuzzy overlapping boundaries and variable forms that are interconnected. It's something that is dynamic and unstable. So this has been this way of conceptualizing English, this ontological approach to what English is, has been pursued in TESOL in various different ways that Rose and Galloway have sort of gathered together as something they call GELT, so Global Englishes for Language Teaching. But these efforts within TESOL have met with resistance and reluctance by many teachers. This has been documented by various scholars, given the entrenched nature of the beliefs involved, and often also the sense of investment that teachers, and especially non-native speaking teachers, have in mastering correct English. So there's a lot of resistance, and therefore I think there's come to be an increasing awareness that this is a challenge that is not going to be solved very rapidly, and probably what the best way to approach it is through teacher training, and especially with pre-service teachers. So get them while they're young and try to get them to think about these issues before they really start in the classroom. So that's the challenge. But it's a difficult one. So we've been thinking about possible resources to try to meet this challenge. And we hit upon the idea of using role models. Now, role models have been used extensively in language learning. And role models have been studied in social psychology. Here's a quote from Gibson, who works, I think, in organizational science, and defines what's involved as the attributes of people in social roles that an individual perceives to be similar to him or herself to some extent, such that he or she desires to increase perceived similarity by emulating those attributes. So the idea here would be that the plurilithic beliefs are going to be of teachers will be emulated by pre-service teachers. Now, the particular idea of near-peer role models, so where the models are very, very identifiable to those who wish to emulate them, that's been studied a lot in language learning by Murphy and colleagues about 20 years ago in Japan. They did a series of studies with near-peer role models. And their findings suggested that this peerness adds a higher sense of identification between the student and the teacher, a kind of possible self dimension. I can see that that person is like me and is modeling those beliefs. They use video clips, so it's the same technique that I'll be talking about today. They found that video clips of learners, for example, commenting on these kinds of issues had a positive effect. Making mistakes is okay. It's good to have goals in learning English. So learners in Japan looked at these other learners, successful learners, making these kind of comments and seemed to change their beliefs as a result. There's only one study that we know of which used this technique with teachers rather than learners, and that was Bernat's study, which was all about the feelings of imposterhood that non-native speaker teachers had, and they were exposed to empowering discourses from other teachers, and this also had a positive effect. So we thought, how about trying this with teachers and changing these ontological beliefs about the nature of English? And so the research questions for this project, which was funded by the British Association for Applied Linguistics, general question was, what impact does brief exposure to teacher modelling of pluralithic orientations to English, which we call the global English's side, and English teaching practices, that's the GELT side, have on postgraduate TESOL students with different L1 backgrounds? Now, the different L1 backgrounds, I hope this will become clear in a moment, is how we operationalized the idea of near peers. So if they shared the same L1 background, we called them near peers. Some of the sub-research questions here. To what extent is exposure to the modeling associated with increased pluralithic orientation? So do people change their beliefs more on the basis of being exposed to these role models? Secondly, to what extent is the near peer status of the teachers sort of adding to that change of belief? And thirdly, does this belief change get maintained? We're only interested in techniques that work over the longer term. So those were our research questions. In terms of design and participants, then we used two contexts. So we had two versions of the role model videos with 3 German early career teachers and 4 early career Chinese teachers expressing this pluralithic approach to English. To get them to talk about the pluralithic orientation, we used as prompts what's called a self-assessment tool in an online course that I had designed along with my colleague Rachel Wichak-Sono, published online. It's free, financed by, supported by the British Council. And that includes a tool that users of the course can take at the beginning of the course, just to see kind of their baseline beliefs about their orientation to English. So we used that tool to get our young teachers to talk about their beliefs. We knew already that they were pluralithically oriented because they were either former students of ours or were recommended by program leads in other institutions. So we assembled 2 clips, 2 video clips from each group, so 4 altogether, from over 4 hours of material. As I said, this happened during lockdown, so this was all done online. It was quite a challenge, but we managed to get these video clips. So I'll give you a very brief extract from each one. I hope the technology works here. First of all, from the Chinese version.
The native speaker can also learn from different varieties of Englishes and to enrich his or her knowledge of English. I think these things make English more and more diversified and also makes English a more colorful language.
So that was from the Chinese version, and from the German version.
I don't want to push my students in a certain direction to speak this way or behave this way. I just want to teach them the English language, and the English language is, in my opinion, diverse and includes a lot of varieties.
Okay, I hope the technology worked there and you could hear those, but that's just a sort of brief experience of what was in the videos. So we recruited MA-TESOL students mostly through program leads, and the students on the MA-TESOL programs were assigned watching the video and the other activities that I'll talk about as a kind of formative exercise. And we managed, after a lot of struggle, to recruit 173 students. These were students at in different countries. So for the German version, they were students at German and Austrian programs. For the Chinese version, they were students in China, in the UK, and in Spanish, one Spanish institution as well. So this allowed us to do a 3-way comparison between German L1 near peers, so watching the German teachers, Mandarin speaking L1 near peers, so watching the Chinese students, and what we called a more distant peer group, which were based in the UK and Spain, and they had another first language, so not Mandarin, and they also watched the Chinese teachers. So the design is kind of like that. We hoped for larger numbers, especially for the other L1 group, but COVID didn't allow it, basically. So we've got the near peers, the German L1, GL1 and ML1, and the more distant peers is the OL1 group. Okay, so we've got the participants, we've got the materials. How did we collect data? Well, we did it in 3 stages. So the first thing we did in stage 1 was to try to get a baseline estimate of their beliefs, and so we designed a survey, a questionnaire called IPOE, which was an instrument to measure pluralithic orientation to English, which was also adapted from the Changing Englishes tool. So they took that questionnaire first. That gave us a numerical, a quantitative index of their beliefs. This was on the basis of a Likert scale, where they rated their agreement to statements like, there is no single correct version of English grammar. There are many Englishes in the world, including both native and non-native versions. So we had that data. Also, we had qualitative data at this stage from open-ended items. So they were asked, what's your immediate reaction? And they could just write whatever they wanted at that stage. In phase 2, they took the IPOE instrument again, so that we could measure change after they'd seen the video. Yeah, so in phase 1, they take the IPOE, they watch the videos, and then after 1 month in stage 2, they take the IPOE again, and we ask them also a few questions about other experiences they might have had with global Englishes. Then finally, in the third phase, after about 5 months, we interviewed some willing participants. So that's the basic design. As I said, we managed to recruit 173 students, but only 81 completed both phases. So we have immediate reaction data from 173 at phase 1, but we only have change in belief statistics from the IPOE for 81 participants in phase 2. We were able to gather more information about the participants at this stage, and a welcome finding was that not only were the near peers sharing the L1, which was the way we originally operationalized it, they were also younger, so they were closer in age to the teachers than the other L1 group. So the other L1 group were maximally distant from the role models, as it were, in both L1 and age. So the results. First of all, the qualitative data from the immediate reactions in this write-in box. I didn't really fully explain the procedure. This was all done online on a dedicated website. So they gave some background data. They did the IPOE test. They watched the videos and then wrote in a text box their immediate reactions. And yeah, the immediate reactions were quite positive. It seems that the videos prompted reflection, raised some awareness, and did in some cases seem to already trigger some changes in belief. So just some illustrative comments. First of all, on the teachers, the role models as non-native speakers. One Austrian participant said, "I liked that you chose people that don't sound native-like and show that you don't need to sound native-like, but you can still be proficient." Another Austrian participant said, "Loved that some were talking English and some were talking German." I should add, we allowed the teachers, the role models, to speak in the language that they preferred. In terms of their perceived authority, one more distant peer said, "I like what they say because they seem to have studied about the topics," so recognizing what they thought was their knowledge, their knowledgeableness about this approach to English. A Mandarin-speaking respondent saying these teachers are very confident in their ELT. They all have very advanced teaching ideas. So comments on authority and comments directly on the impact of the videos. So a German respondent saying, "I found the question as interesting as the answers and think I have learned a few things that can help me along the way of becoming an English teacher myself." And another Mandarin speaker, "It's quite different from my former English language learning philosophy. I think I should learn from some novel and creative ideas from the teacher to supplement my teaching." But it wasn't all positive. There were some more critical responses too. For example, "The guy annoyed me. I don't like English teachers with strong German accents. I don't mind if people I'm talking to have German accents, but if a teacher has an accent like that, I personally don't like it. Right, so this is one teacher with, you know, very monolithic views. Another one, I was a bit disappointed because the blonde girl only used the German language, so presumably not keen on translanguaging. Also on teachers as non-native speakers, one of the a native speaker of English, in fact, in this case, so one of the other L1 group said, interesting, however, it would have been interesting to hear the views of native English speaker as part of the video. And another native speaker of English saying, the teachers are of Asian heritage and they use broken English to communicate. Ouch. And on authority, an Austrian respondent saying, well, the people in the video don't look or sound like English teachers. Didn't elaborate on it, but who knows whether it's to do with age or I'm not sure. And another one, another Austrian saying, I agree with many things that have been said, but there are some which I see slightly different. It would have been interesting to hear older teachers as well. So again, highlighting this, in this case, lack of identification, perhaps. We also quantitatively counted the degrees of agreement with the teachers. And we found a clear correlation between near-peer beliefs and agreement. So you can see there on this graph that the German and Mandarin speaking student teachers, TESOL students, were more likely to agree with the teachers than those who are in the more distant peer group. If we turn now to the main quantitative measure, which is the IPOE scores, so the difference in scores pre and post survey, so pre and post exposure to the videos. And so this is in a way looking at the how long the effect might last as well. So this was a 1 month after they saw the videos. And I hope you can see there that there's clearly an increase for all groups in terms of their, this is the mean score pre-video and post-video for the 3 groups. But I hope you can also see that the lines for the near-peer groups, so the German and Mandarin L1 students, are steeper. And in fact, those two are statistically significant. We ran a Wilcoxon-signed rank test, and those two were significantly greater post-video. The other L1, so the more distant peer group, that change pre to post-video is not significantly different. Also, we found that more of the near-peer group increased their scores, but only about half of the more distant other L1 groups increased their scores. Right, so the others either stayed the same or slightly dropped in terms of scores. So the quantitative data seem to follow the predictions. Turning now to the interview results, and I hope I'm not going too fast through this. I'm conscious that I ran over the last time I gave this talk, so let me know if I'm going too fast. Interview results. After 5 months, we contacted participants again, those who had expressed willingness to be interviewed, to see if we could go into a bit more depth on their experiences. And we recruited 9 participants for this interview stage. The interviews were conducted in the participants' first language and lasted around about 30 minutes on average. So we were able to interview 4 participants who were in the German L1 group, and this was all done online by Alice, who is a German native speaker, with 2 males and 2 females. For the Mandarin first language group, these were done in person, so they were out of lockdown at that point, and UN did the interviews there. And for the other L1 group, they were also done online, and that was 2 participants, one who happened to have German as a first language, and the other who happened to have English as a first language. They were also interviewed by Alice, who happens to be bilingual English and German. So we had some rich data from the interviews as well. I'll only give you a sort of snapshot of some of the what the interviewees told us at that stage. So one of the themes that emerged was this idea of raised consciousness or reflections being triggered, which is really what we were after. That was the whole real point of this. So one of the Mandarin speaking interviewees said, I had those ideas before watching the videos. So by ideas, we assume they meant pluralithic ideas, but without the guidance of the questions in the videos, they were only in my subconscious. Right? So this is a nice kind of reflection of this idea of raised consciousness, that the videos managed to raise consciousness. And triggering reflections, we have a quote here from one of the German-speaking participants. I've often thought about it, meaning this whole exercise. Remember, this is 5 months after the original contact was made, and it has inspired me to reflect. So that's quite positive. In terms of particularly the near peer effects, which is all about how closely the MA-TESOL students identify with the teacher models. We have a couple of comments here, both from German respondents in this case. Perhaps we're a little closer to each other, right? So us, the MA students, and the 3 teachers in the video, in terms of thinking patterns. We have experienced English lessons in a more similar way than teachers who have been teaching for about 15 or 20 years. So there's a clear identification there, not only on first language and context, but also age. And then also the second respondent there saying, I identified with the women probably mostly because I'm one myself. Yeah, so there are other dimensions going on here as well of identification, which could be explored in future studies. And finally, cultural differences, so bringing in the other L1 group, the more distant peers. Clearly, we were getting from the near peers a greater sense of the fact that they found the teachers inspiring. And so we have one from the German L1 speaker. I hope that I will also become like that someday. And the Mandarin English speaker saying of the Chinese speaker teachers that they were exposed to, I hope I could be that kind of person. Right, so clear near peer role model inspiration there. And then 2 comments from the other L1 group, both from native speakers. So native speaker in sorry, that's wrong. One is a native speaker of English, the other one is a native speaker of German. First one, I think they have more authority because they've experienced this. Yeah, so there was definitely this effect of, whether it's us and them. And the second comment, I think in their cultural frame, they are definitely role models in their cultural frame. Unfortunately, I can only evaluate them based on the content. So that's rather nice that distinction being made with what is said and who is saying it. And our original intuition was that the who is saying it is going to be an important part of convincing people to think about what is said as well. So, bit of a summary then. In terms of the general research question, then I think it's quite encouraging what we found. The data clearly suggest that viewing the videos did have a positive impact overall on most of the MA students who saw them. In terms of the specific research questions, the data suggests that viewing teachers modeling this pluralithic orientation is followed by increases in pluralithic orientation. We can be reasonably confident of this given the numbers. 2/3 of participants increased their IPO score post-video. So quantitative data. Qualitative data also suggest suggest viewing the videos provoked reassessment or moderation of previous monolithic beliefs or a strengthening of an existing pluralithic orientation. Now, of course, we can be reasonably confident, but there are problematic issues too, and that's why I was very careful to say increases in belief followed viewing of the videos. It's tough to actually kind of impute causality here, to attribute causality without having a really strict experimental approach, which we didn't want to do. So we could have had a control group and an experimental group, but we were worried about how that would affect the sort of ecological validity of the exercise. One thing we do know, though, is that other exposure to global Englishes doesn't seem to have explained the increases in IPO scores. So that was one thing also that we didn't have complete control over what was happening. The students may well have been doing other global Englishes courses at the same time. So we did ask about that. The group that had least exposure to ideas about global Englishes independent of our videos was the Mandarin L1 group, and yet that group was the one with the greatest increase in belief. So we're pretty sure that that wasn't the main driver of the change that we measured across that month. In terms of the second research question, which is concentrating on the near-peer effect, again, we clearly found that in the IPO results, where we saw statistically significant increases in scores for the near peers, but not for the more distant peers. Also in the levels of agreement that we quantified with the teachers, where again, it was the near peers who tended to agree more with the teachers than the more distant peers. But again, it's not always as clear-cut as that. So these comparisons were complicated by the different sample sizes, and as I've tried to be honest about, given the effects of COVID, it was difficult to not only to recruit students, but also to retain those students when, as you all remember, our lives were not terribly stable across those months. There were also different degrees of engagement, and of course the two video versions themselves weren't directly comparable because they had different teachers, so there was different content, different style there. But again, I think we're reasonably confident that the effect was more positive for the near peers. Finally, the third research question, which was about whether this was long-lasting or not, because that, again, is the whole point. We're trying to find a way into these really entrenched beliefs that is likely to be lasting. And yeah, I think because we found that those changes 1 month after the initial viewing, and then some very positive comments about reflection and change 5 months following, with people talking about, interviewees talking about how they were still chatting with, in one case with their family members, in another case with other students about the videos, that this did seem, at least for a significant number of students, to have had a longer lasting effect. So some conclusions. We do think that there is a role for video clips featuring role models as an effective strategy for trying to trigger or consolidate changes of belief in teacher education for English as a global language. Basically, sort of take-home message is the more teachers can identify with the role models presented to them, the greater the impact will be. So what we're going to do is share these video materials with a Creative Commons license for use and adaptation on the Changing Englishes course, which you can see the URL there. And we're also going to put the IPOE instrument into the IRIS database, which is a database which makes available tools and research tools and instruments related to second language learning, so that people can adapt this to their own local sort of pluralithic contexts. And yeah, that's it. Just before I stop, again, I'd like to acknowledge funding from British Association for Applied Linguistics, and also to our young early career teachers, Anna, Leo, May, Renchen, Tassilo, Vivian and Yinong Chu, to the MAT-SOL student participants who watched the videos and answered our questions, and also to the MA program directors who helped us recruit them. So thank you very much indeed. Here are some references.